I assume we're live. Right, thank you. Everybody should have got the main batch of papers, and then there was a supplementary paper, which was the update on send, which will be coming to in item 6A. Just a few normal business. We've got apologies of absence from Nicola Dayton, Lee Hannon, Marianne Curran, Esther Messenger can't make it today, and sadly she's going to resign, but good for her. She's got a new headship in Gloucestershire. Sarah Lavelle can't make it. She's off on maternity leave, so we wish her all the best. And Andy Rothery, apologies. Lauren, you've confirmed will call it. New members and resignations. First of all, Eileen, thank you for all your years' service, and sadly your last meeting, and yeah, I believe you're moving into retirement.
Yes, I will be. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all the best for that. Esther, I've mentioned. Another person who you may know who does a lot of the work in the background, like the duck's feet swimming, is Levi Mapston. She does a lot of the finance, and she's off on maternity leave on Friday. So wish her all the best. And then one other, I welcome a guest. We've got John Simpson is going to join us for the first part of the meeting. John is my equivalent at North Somerset, chairs the North Somerset Schools Forum, and I've recently attended one of their meetings, and we're engaging in a bit of collaborative discussion to see whether there's collaborations, whether we've got shared solutions. So welcome to him. In terms of notifications of vacancies, I think Lauren and Steve have done some work looking at where we are in terms of our current numbers versus what we sort of should have according to the Constitution. I think in summary, we're very close to the, if you like, the design. In theory, one less maintained primary and one more. We need one more academy primary. And so we do, we do have a few vacancies. Obviously, we'll have a vacancy with Eileen leaving in the PRU space. And where we were was primary head missing and maintained, 2 primary governors, an academy, and then now potentially something for Esther. So I think, Lauren, we should loop around and see where we are.
Yeah, I'm going to confirm that once we've gone through the final bits of the agenda and we go to the replies from the survey that we did. But we'll work around and we'll just see where we are at the end, and then we'll put adverts out along the usual channels to advise. But if anyone could also speak about it, that would be absolutely spectacular.
Okay. And I think in some way it's going to be, might be a bit light on academy primaries, either governors or head teachers. Okay, and any declarations of interest from anybody? No. Okay, thank you very much. Right, and I can see everybody. Oh, Christine's joined us as well. I can see everybody on my screen, but if you want to make a comment, then please either raise a Zoom hand or feel free to just let me know verbally. Right, I think we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Any matters of substance on any of the minutes? No, we'll assume those are signed. There was one action which was around Vic, and that's not until September, and it was around providing an update on reductions. That's in for a September meeting. Okay, that's that. We will now move on to agenda item 4, entitled Scheme Finance in Schools. Steve Goodwin, I think you're presenting, and I think there is a vote at the end of this for maintained representatives.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Everyone's had the paper in advance, and effectively this is a prescribed change by the Department for Education in respect to the scheme for financing maintained schools. Forums asked and invited to note the updates made. There's effectively 2 updates, one that's prescribed by the Department for Education and one that's updated by Bristol City Council in respect of the number of maintained schools. And we've removed the academy schools that converted since the last update in 2024. The change that's been made is in respect to section 4.2, charges that can be made to school budget shares, and it's purely in respect to the Department of Education have issued the update to be included within the scheme in respect to where a school's budget share may be charged for the cost of an undisputed invoice for energy where the school has entered into an agreement with the Secretary of State. Now, that is the only prescribed change in this scheme. I don't know if this applies to any of our maintained schools, if any of them have got such energy agreements with the Department for Education. So we're asking schools to accept that, and then that will be applied with immediate effect to our scheme and will be applied to any schools if that instance ever arises. The other changes I've mentioned are in respect to Annex 1 of the scheme. We've not provided the full scheme. It's about 60 pages long, so I didn't want to bombard you with the full paper tonight, but effectively Annex 1 is the list of maintained schools, so it includes the nurseries, the primaries, the secondary and the specials that are still maintained by the local authority. And then straight to the recommendation that we ask for our maintained school representatives on behalf of their sector to accept these changes, and then we can publish this scheme as we are required to do so that it is available for public inspection.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Merch?
Yeah, just as a point of information, how many maintained schools do we have in the different categories now?
We've got 12 nursery schools. In total, we've got 56 maintained schools left. So we've got 2 secondary, probably about 5 special, and then the balance of that will then be primary schools.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, clarifications? No. Okay, so we need to move to a vote. Lauren, remind me the best way to do this online.
What I'm going to do is, if everyone in the maintained setting, because this is maintained only, so I think we've got Merch, Melanie, and Nick Bailey. I can't see anyone else from a maintained setting present. Am I wrong? I don't think I can.
Alistair's raising his hand.
Alistair, sorry.
Oh, and Kate. Kate,
and me.
Yes, you are. Sorry. Why have I missed you? It's all right. I must have missed
the
you.
nursery schools were early years, so it's easy.
No, it's because we had to miss you. I didn't let everyone in, so I think I've missed that you are here, but you are not here. Just fine. So, what I'll do is if I can pop through and I'll read through the names, and can I just get either agree, disagree, or abstain, because that's your 3 options, and then we will know I can actually record what you do. So you either agree, so the vote is carried. You disagree, so that you don't agree with the recommendation, or you're abstaining, because you have the right to do that, and then I can tell people the vote at the end, if that makes sense to everyone. Otherwise, I don't want to get confused and you put your hand up at the wrong time.
Good. Let's do it.
So, Alistair?
He's got his thumb up, he agrees.
Okay. Kate?
Agree.
Thank you. I'm just going to my next one. Merch?
Agree.
Thank you. Melanie? Agree? Sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, you're fine. And Nick Bailey?
Yep.
Can't see. Thank you. So that is carried. I've got all maintained. So that's a unanimous carry for that one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. In which case, then we'll go on to, well, we've got two dedicated school grant reports. We've got the outrun for the entire period, and then the current position. And I think, Steve, you're talking to both of them. So first off, the outrun.
Okay.
Sorry, Steve, before we move to that one, do we need to just get the forum to note that the report? Are you happy that that report's been noted? Because you needed a noting on that one, didn't you? On the previous one.
To note the changes, but everyone's put the thumbs up. I thought that was all captured at the same time.
Yeah, it's fine. Just wanted to check that you wanted noted. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
Okay, so item 5 is the dedicated schools grant final outturn position for 2024-25. Does anybody want me to share the report on screen, or are you all happy to look at the reports you've got in front of you?
Steve, I think it's good practice if it's easy for you to share on screen.
Yep, no problem.
I don't know if you can, because you're not a host. So give me 20. Oh, you can. There we go.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Right, it's just blocked my view, but okay. So if you can hopefully all see this screen now. So this is the, as I say, the outturn report as at the 31st of March 2025 for the 2024-25 financial year. The update in terms of the DSG, the dedicated schools grant final allocation was £494.5 million. The narrative in the report explains how that's broken down. Essentially, I'm just going to go to the highlights in terms of the final position. So the position at period 12 showed 25.5 million in-year overspend on the dedicated schools grant. We do have a reserve, which is part of the safety valve agreement of 6.7 million. So therefore, the deficit reported to the Department for Education was 18.7 million in terms of the in-year overspend. When taken into account the deficit brought forward from the previous year, we have a £62.6 million deficit on the total DSG, which is reduced to 55.6 million when you take the reserve into account. The breakdown of the overspend you can see by block. So we've got a 700,000 underspend on the schools block. That's essentially the underspend on growth, which will be carried forward to use for those ongoing commitments for the growth fund. Slight overspend on central school services block, which is due to increased national copyright license fees. The de-delegation was an in-year overspend there, which we committed to for the trade union facilities time, which was the use of the reserve in that respect. Early years block was just over 600,000 underspend. Now that's always due to estimated headcounts, and that is subject to an accrual to carry that money forward into the new financial year. And we get a dedicated schools grant update for early years and the final adjustments in July, so anytime now. So all that balances out over 2 financial years. It's an ongoing thing with early years. It's probably the most complicated aspect of the DSG, where we see the most adjustments in year based on the termly headcounts. And particularly for the new year, we've got lots of estimates for the increased eligibilities that we're expecting from September and so on. So we'll probably see some more volatile movements on early years, but we'll report the detail to you on that in due course. High needs block is where the pressure is. So you can see the 18 million overspend there. and then the amount that's been committed from the BCC reserve. So all in all, that's the £25.5 million in-year overspend. And I've mentioned the headlines before in terms of when they've added to the balance brought forward from the previous year. I've gone through the rest of this narrative briefly, just in terms of the explanations. The high needs block, as you all know, again, it's a recurring theme with Schools Forum updates. It's due to education, health and care plan volumes, number of children educated in high cost, independent, non-maintained provision, top-up funding that goes into all our schools, special schools and mainstream schools as well. And all of that is obviously subject to the safety valve deficit recovery plan and the intervention and the work that we're working alongside the Department for Education with. In terms of schools, we have seen an adverse movement in school balances of 2.1 million. So it's getting quite a bit tighter in terms of the number of schools remaining with surplus balances. We have seen some positive movements in the early years sector, so we know they've got a significant deficit that's been brought forward and accumulated for several years. We have seen that turn the corner now, and we're working with the nursery sector on their deficit recovery plans. So the forecast is for that to continue to reduce, which is good to see. Any of the other schools that have got a current deficit or are forecasting a deficit, we are working with all of those directly, going out to see them, working with the chairs, the governors, the head teachers, business managers to make sure we have got robust and realistic deficit recovery plans in place for all schools facing financial difficulty. You can see the in-year movement there, as I've said, adverse movement of £2.1 million. So overall, the school balances are in deficit by just under 5.7 million. So we need to continue that journey and that work and intervention to make sure we get the schools back into a positive position as soon as practically possible. The rest of the report takes into account the numbers of schools in surplus, the number of schools in deficit. So it's just all there in the narrative. And again, we're just reiterating the fact that we're working on the deficit recovery plan, not just for schools, but for the high needs block and the safety valve intervention as well. That's it on the Outturn report. So I'm happy to take any questions or any comments.
Okay.
I can't see everybody, so
yeah, all right. Okay, Louise M.
Hello, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Thank you for the report. It was really helpful to understand. In paragraph 3.4, you talk about the schools block underspend of about £3 million cumulatively, which is increased. I just wondered if you could tell me, and I'm new to the forum, so apologies for not knowing, what commitments there are for the use of that. And if there aren't any commitments, I want to ask about a future use of it, if it's possible. So could I ask that first?
Yeah, sure. I think the 3 million is made up of the growth fund, plus we've had adjustments for schools that have converted, that have closed as well. So we've got a balance there. There is, as far as I'm aware, the commitment is purely around supporting schools with growth. I haven't got any other commitments that I'm aware of, so it will be something that I'm going to have to take back and respond more thoroughly to you on that, Louise.
Thank you. And that kind of links into my next question then, really, because I noted, and you've mentioned it in your presentation, about the level of deficits and the number of schools in deficit and the work that you're doing with them. And obviously that appears to be fairly significant. And I just wondered whether, if there are no commitments for that £3 million, whether there could be anything done to support schools in deficit, either with some of the historic deficits or with supporting redundancy costs where they're making changes in order to set a more sustainable budget.
Okay, it's definitely something we can consider. I know Vic's put his hand up, and I'll have a discussion with Vic around that. Redundancies is always a sensitive one, because if a school is in surplus, the local authority doesn't need to pick up the cost of redundancies, and there's always a forward plan with that, where schools will have the benefit of the recurring savings from any staff that they've made redundant. So we need to be mindful of that. We can't just fund the redundancies. For schools in deficit, it's a different consideration for those. So there's definitely some scope to look to support those where we can.
Thank you.
But again, I do need to discuss this with Vic, and it's certainly an opportunity to look at to see how we can utilise that.
Thank you. And then I've got one final one, if that's okay, which was in paragraph 3.16. There was a mention of a £0.7 million grant for schools in financial difficulty. And I just wondered whether you could say any more about how that was or has been used as well.
Okay,
and then I'll be quiet. Thank you.
No, it's fine. Thank you for the questions. We received a grant, and there's several authorities that received some contributions from the DFE by way of a grant, which was specifically earmarked to support schools in financial difficulty. And it was based on schools in deficit going back to 2022-23. We didn't receive the funding until late in 2023-24. And so it was rolled forward to utilise in the last financial year. So I'm pleased to say it was fully utilised. We had an agreement that 50% of that contribution would go into the nursery schools to help them with their significant deficits. That's part of the reason why their overall deficits have decreased by the end of last financial year. The other 50% was split between the schools that recorded deficits in 22-23 and those that were still in deficit in 23-24 and facing significant financial difficulty. So it was split between relevant eligible primary schools and secondary schools. It didn't go to special schools because they're subject to different funding arrangements through the place funding. So we're looking at any special schools with financial difficulty through their top-up funding and place funding. So all of the 700,000 was fully allocated, and we couldn't carry it forward into this new financial year anyway. So we did make sure it was all allocated out.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Louise. I've got Kate P got a hand up, but actually, can I just jump in before that, because it sort of follows on a bit from Louise on the growth fund initiative and underspent. Stephen, does Forum get an update? I think we should get an update on how the growth fund has been used, and when is that?
Yeah, you tend to get an update in the new academic year when we've got all the new admissions and then we've got planned growth. So it's something we can bring on a more regular basis in terms of the monitoring. So we can certainly bring that on a termly basis. But yeah, I know there was detail brought to a previous forum in terms of the schools that are currently subject to the growth commitments, and then any consideration to new growth is subject to individual schools meeting the criteria. So, in terms of planned admission numbers, class sizes, basic need. So we do have the criteria there, but definitely can bring a more detailed update to future forum.
I think that would be helpful, because I mean, on the one hand, all the academy schools are sort of crying out for funding, but as part of the budgeting, it's ring fenced. But if the money is not being spent, then it would be useful to hear about
there are ongoing commitments from previous decisions. So we get growth fund, which applies to each academic year, for the number of years that the growth filters through the school. So we have got ongoing commitments. So we can bring that detail to the next forum, definitely.
Thank you. And Kate, over to you.
I was just following on from Louise, really, because was I right in that there's an underspend in the early years block as well?
There is, but that's I've tried to explain that's due to the way that the early years block in particular is allocated through estimated headcounts and estimated participation levels. So it's an annual recurrence. So we always have an end of year adjustment, and then that's subject to the final early years block allocation relating to last year. We don't get until this month. So we have to account for that in the system to make sure we're covered for the adjustment that the DFE make in July based on actual headcounts from the previous year rather than estimated.
Yeah, you're right. It is the most complex situation to sort out. As a head teacher, I spend most of my time with a crystal ball trying to predict everything. Thank you. Thanks for that. And I just wanted to add that thank you for the positive bit, because it's one of the first times, isn't it, with early years that you've said, yes, we've been underfunded for many years, as we know. And and we've had that deficit, but you're right, we have turned a corner and it feels really positive. So thank you for that positive bit of update.
Thank you. There's still more to do, I think, particularly on 3 and 4 year old funding, but that's based on what the DFE gives to us. So we'll still be lobbying for more, in particular for 3 and 4 year olds. There's been big increases on 2 year olds, but we can't forget the other age ranges as well.
Exactly. And then we're moving on to SEND a bit later, aren't we? So I will leave it there. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yes, Kate, exactly. We have the supplementary paper on SEND, so that obviously might be questions then. Any more? I can't see any more questions for Stephen. In which case, Steve, do you want to move on to agenda item 6?
Okay, so thanks, Steve. So you've just seen the end of year outturn for 24-25. So this is the current position as at the end of period 2, in line with the reporting requirements we have for committees and so on within the council. The new dedicated schools grant allocation is over £500 million now. It's just short of 548 million. There was a slight adjustment between the original notification, which was used for council budget setting, and the latest allocation notified to us in March. And that was an addition for an omission of the Department for Education to recognise the split site funding for one school. So that was just a 55,000 increase to that allocation. No other changes at this point. We do have the net figure, which is how much actually comes to Bristol after academy recruitment, and that's just under 244 million now. So all that's allocated through our high needs block, early years block, schools block, etc. In terms of the current in-year position, we actually are forecasting another in-year deficit. So we've got a 25.5 million in-year deficit. This is currently forecast according to the planned spend, which aligns to what was approved at full council budget setting in accordance to the submission on the deficit management plan. So there is a planned increase in the spend on the DSG in terms of the overspending year, which is part of the recovery plan. So we spend more now in order to develop the provision for the top-up funding, and then we turn the corner on the deficit in future years. So as I say, that's all in line with what we've notified to the DFE in terms of the section 251 budget statement, which is one of the statutory documents we have to submit to them. Just to give you the breakdown of that 25 million, you can see the breakdown per schools. We don't forecast in-year variances on schools until later in the year because all of that information is held outside of the system, but there will be an adjustment for that at year end. You can see the majority of the overspend is all on the high needs line. And then we've got the contributions coming in still from the council. So it's all broken down there into the 25.5 million. The narrative is exactly as I've said in respect to the outturn, the pressures on the high needs block, EHCPs, independent non-maintained provision, high costs. And again, that's probably going to be a recurring theme on every monitoring report you see during the year. That is it in terms of the current position. So it's obviously an increasing deficit position, but we know why that's happening and there is a plan to turn that around in the future. Again, any questions or comments, happy to take those.
Unmute. Yeah, Rick, sorry.
That's fine. Thanks, Steve. I'm just thinking, Steve Goodwin, is it worth mentioning with the outturn position as well? Because I'm not sure if we'd had a forum since, but certainly the outturn position at the end of the 24-5 financial year was as forecast, which was really positive in terms of whilst there's a deficit, actually we were able to predict the position much better, whereas in previous years that has fluctuated in terms of what the budget and forecast was. And again, that's in part down to the improvement in the quality of data that's being used, the assumptions underlying the model. So Steve, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on some of those aspects as well.
It's probably more a comment for Guy. I know Guy's in the room because Guy, as finance business partner, and working with other colleagues in the team, do the forecasts aligned with the DFE management plan. But as Vic's just said, it was very close. We did a forecast in period 10, and there was very little movement by the time we got to the end of year, period 12 outturn. It's because of the intelligence we've got behind the scenes, the data, the actual trajectories that are being used to predict the number of EHCPs coming through the system and top-ups. So it's a huge, immense piece of work, as you can imagine, to break that down, particularly with the thousands of children that we're talking about for EHCPs and top-up funding and so on. So it's not much more I can say really, Vic, other than we're confident in the data. We're not necessarily happy with the forecast because we do want to see it turn around and go to a positive position as soon as possible. We're always up against pressures from the volumes of EHCPs coming through the system, which then has other ramifications in respect to where those children are placed. So we've got capital infrastructure to develop as well to help us maintain the children within the local authority area. We've got home to school transport links, which follow from the number of EHCPs coming through. So there's so much all interlinked to this. It's probably, which will be subject to probably the other update on the next item on the agenda.
I guess, Steve, it is worth saying, I mean, the first part is about getting in control and being able to, trust in the forecast. So that's got to be, well done to everybody in the team to be able to, have good confidence in the control in the numbers. That's a platform for the future. So
I think it's worth acknowledging the central support services as well. So the SEND team, the education psychology team are doing everything they can to work through and support all these young people and to get the right outcomes for them. So that's what matters at the end of the day, the outcomes for the all these eligible young children.
Okay, anybody got anything else for Steve on the current position? No. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. We're going to go on to what's called item 6A, which is transformation update. I had it work that Sam was going to speak to this. Sam Flowers. Vic?
I think Sam submitted the report, but I can probably take colleagues through and take us to questions if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Just before we do that, I know a couple of forum members had sort of asked me specifically about the EHCP process, and almost at the same time as Chair, I got a letter from Hannah Woodhouse, talking about the increases and various actions that are going on. I think a lot of that is actually then covered in more detail in the report you've got. And I think a version of that letter was sent to other channels, but if it's helpful, I can share that with forum members as well. Okay. All right. A few nods. I'll share that as well. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, well, over to you, Vic.
Yes, thank you. I think that was the intention, is that the letter is shared with you to share with members. So perhaps we don't need to spend as much time on that item. And if there are questions then that aren't answered by the letter, then we can pick those up. So the purpose of this report, so this is a mirror copy of the report that was submitted to the Children and Young People's Committee, and that committee took place on the 26th of June. So it's consistent with the report that is already publicly available and went to that committee. So I'll speak to some of the content, but I think perhaps the discussion will be helpful alongside this. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on, I suppose, the entirety of our SEND and alternative provision transformation programme, which encompasses the work to deliver our SEND strategy, which was published in January of this year, but also speaks to the work around safety valve. And I suppose what we've tried to do is not split these things off into separate component parts, actually present these as one larger program that we are working on, because that's the way that our services and our team experiences that. I am also joined by Emma Lloyd, who's our head of inclusion. So there may be some comments, questions from both of us as you need responses. So the key areas of progress over the last 12 months, and this is a retrospective on on the work over that period. So firstly, the lifting of the written statement of action, and that was particularly around our improved collaboration and partnership working, and that was lifted by the Department for Education on November 2024. We took them through a large evidence pack of the work we've been doing alongside a presentation with our local area partners, and there was positive feedback and confidence in the work that we were doing and the plan that we have in place alongside this through the strategy. We've also spent a lot of time improving the governance. So in September of 2024, we launched a new governance approach with our local area partners in health, and also with our Bristol Parent Care Forum. So that's been really well received. We hit a really good level of maturity there in terms of that governance embedding, good discussion, and we're supported there by our DFE advisor, as well as an LGA member in that support, but also it's independently chaired, so we get that positive kind of support and challenge and that balance of both. We also launched our Memorandum of Understanding, which is our commitment to our partners and each other in terms of how we work, and our co-production charter. And again, that's part of the kind of key foundations that we've been building in how we want our service to operate. We have a permanent leadership team, which has been really supportive in terms of stability to the service. And in the last year, and this is partly what's covered in the letter that was shared with you, Steve, but we spent a considerable amount of time restructuring the service with the aim of reducing caseloads, and there was a nearly £1 million investment in that service to grow the team, and some of that recruitment has been happening in parts through the year. So the restructure finished at the end of February 2025, working with the service, and now most of that recruitment is now done. We also invested an additional £500,000 into education psychologists, because again we are reliant on colleagues in those services being able to support children through assessment in order to meet their needs at the front door and support that in terms of EHCP needs assessment timeliness. We put in a £1 million investment in a new early intervention service. So the name of that service is now the Inclusive Learning Service. That's 10 members of staff that were all successfully recruited, coming from a range of specialist teaching, SENCO backgrounds. They will all be starting together in September, and then we'll start working with all schools in Bristol, or primary and secondary schools in Bristol, from the autumn, following their induction period. And that's again part of our early intervention investment that we've shared here before. We have a sizable capital program, and that's underway. That is challenging in terms of the pace at which it takes capital programs to get off the ground and delivered, but also our reliance on the Department for Education for one of the schemes, which they are funding as well. So planned investment, but it is a long-term investment. And then we've also been working very closely with the Bristol Parent Care Forum to look at the funding model for them to ensure that they have sufficient capacity to work with us as our recognised Parent Care Forum, and that collaborative work and co-production that we do there. So there's probably more I could say about positive progress, and we'll keep bringing updates here as needed. But a lot of the work we've been doing over the last, I'd say this academic year particularly, but certainly over the last 12 months, has been in terms of getting the operating model right for the service, ensuring we bring down caseloads. We've got investment in the services that enable support to children, also the publishing of our strategy. So, that's much of what we've been sharing through the year. setting us up for, importantly, a sustainable improvement in the service, not just a kind of short-term improvement, but actually thinking about this over the long term and the conditions for success around that. I think in terms of updates, so we've covered the financials already, so I won't repeat what's been covered by Steve, but there is a bit more information about the financial position in terms of safety valve in the updates already provided. On page 8 of the supplementary, we talk a bit about the SEND and Inclusion Strategy Development Plan. That's a plan with approximately 90 actions on it, which are drawn from the safety valve, the strategy, but also any actions that were not completed in the previous strategies that we looked at. And we were really mindful to capture kind of everything that had been put in place to make sure we carry that forward, refresh that to the new development plan, but bring together what was emerging from the consultation we held in the strategy. The overarching kind of update is that about 40% of those actions are now complete. We don't close actions, so where there's a bit of a breakdown of the percentages, we don't close them immediately on reporting that they have been closed. What we do is we hold some of those actions to await the evidence. We look at the evidence that's been provided to demonstrate that that action is complete. That's then reviewed by myself and colleagues, and then we qualify that to complete, which is why you'll see some notes there around awaiting evidence, or we've seen evidence, but we're just waiting to see that improvement. So we've kept a real discipline around the difference between an action being perceived as complete and actually our moderation of that. But we're really pleased that 40% of the actions in the plan are complete. We're only 6 months into the strategy, but we know that we were starting much of that work in the autumn as well. And then there is another 40% of actions that are underway as expected. Where there are delays, those are reported to a SEND delivery board. The governance is described in this report, and we take action to intervene when needed, as you would expect with any program of this size. There is a bit of information on progress made in each priority area. So I suppose rather than go through kind of each point, I'll probably pause for questions. I think the final thing I'd say is we've shared a copy of our safety valve update, I suppose, in terms of progress against conditions. The key points of note there is that on condition 1, which is about our strategy, we've identified that as blue. That's complete. Our strategy was launched in January of 2025, so we've qualified that as complete. On condition 2, enhancing our early intervention offer, again green. Again, good progress in terms of our new early intervention fund and our inclusive support team. Condition 3, again green, where we've been talking there about the development of our practice leadership team and the work that's been happening through that work to support children to return back to settings in Bristol. And then in conditions 4, which is around our graduated approach, we have flagged that as amber. It's actually complete, so there's been really good co-production working with schools and trusts on our new graduated approach document. It'll be launched in September, so we anticipate that will go to green next quarter. But we just held that as amber while it was completing. Condition 5, in terms of improving EHCP process and our kind of timeliness and work around that, again held as amber. There's a significant amount of work happening in that space. Condition 6, it kind of alludes to what Steve Goodwin was sharing earlier about the data improving. Again, we've held in amber just in that there is still a significant amount of work taking place to improve data quality, but we have seen a 42% improvement in data. So there's lots of positives to draw from there. But again, we're just cautioning against that being green because there is still work to do. And then red being our capital programme. I think firstly, still waiting on the outcome from the DFE on the Trim Valley Free School, but also mindful that a significant number of the savings in this programme are about moving children back from independent settings into Bristol, and the capital programme will take time to be able to achieve that, because many of those children are already in INM settings, and the capital programme needs to accelerate to support need that we have now, but also need that exists in the system already. I'll pause there. That's probably quite a lot of information, but the report is very detailed and transparent, which I think was the ask, Steve. And I think, again, we have tried to take that approach in sharing.
So, Vic, thank you. It is really detailed. It looks really structured, and from my perspective, it seems to be very valuable and answering some of the questions that people had. So let me throw it open to all forum members for any questions, observations. And Louise.
Sorry, me again. Thank you, and I completely agree with what you said, Steve. It's a really interesting and useful report, and it's got lots of really helpful detail in it. So thank you for providing that. And it's clear that there's a huge amount of activity going on to try and improve some of the statistics that were provided within the report. So that all seems really positive. But some of the statistics in there are still really scary and quite worrying. We grateful Vic's meeting with our particular trust next week to talk about some of the detail of this. But I particularly wanted to point out that there's 251 children who've been waiting over 40 weeks and some over a year for their EHCPs. And in addition to the significant impact that has on that child or young person's education, in some cases that's having a really significant impact on school budgets as well, because they're filling in the holes in terms of making sure there's provision for these children, and it's completely financially unsustainable. And I'm sure will be part of the reason why you've seen worsening of your deficit situation in maintained schools, and it's definitely a worsening of the position in academies as well. So I just wanted to say that, and just to make the plea to try and make sure that you make the improvements you're planning, and where necessary you can put support into schools in the interim while those processes are going through. So that I've got one more question as well, so I don't know whether you want to answer before I go on to my second question.
Yeah, well, there was some of that was comment and some was question. What was the specific question you'd like me to respond to?
It was really about how you can support schools where they are having to put in additional financial support that's not being provided by the council while they're waiting for the EHCP process, and what you can do to improve that position for the financial impacts it's having on the schools and the impacts it's having on the children and young people. Yeah,
okay, I understand. I think the first thing I'd say is this is not a US schools and us as local authority challenge. This is something for all of us collectively across the wider education system, the health system, the social care system as well. It's a larger challenge for all of us, and colleagues will know some of the national issues that sit around this. I think firstly we did take quite rapid action in terms of the investment we've been putting in to increase the capacity of our services, but also I took the decision, which I think I shared here in March of this year, to extend top up for those children who were already receiving top up, because that would have been a cliff edge for children potentially, who were coming to an end in July now, but also in subsequent years. So whilst the decision that was taken at Cabinet in February 2024 was to end top up, for the children that were in receipt of that, and that could have ended in July this year, next year, or the year after. We've extended that indefinitely whilst we continue to complete those assessments. We also launched the Early Intervention Fund, which continues. That's the £1 million grant, and there's still work to do there to share more of that. But again, that's part of the support for early intervention. But it is, I agree, it is challenging when top up was removed, because a number of children would have been supported by that. And again, that's why we extended it in that way. I think in terms of the other action we've taken we are now seeing, whereas previously in 2023 and 24, the service was completing assessments about 65 a year. If you look at the averages over the course of that year, we've already seen an improvement this year to get, I think it's to 88. I'll check the figure in just a moment. 88 already just in the January to May. So already by May of this year, we've completed as many assessments as we would have in July of last year and the year before. So there is a ramping up of productivity, and that's where that investment has been really vital. But we need to sustain that, and that's why there is funding for the rest of the year to keep this going. But it will take all of us to manage this in terms of collective support, making sure that we're requesting needs assessments for the right children, and that graduated approach is being applied. I think in the broader sense, the national position on the funding, which is challenging for all of us, but also in local authorities as well, is I believe in the region of £4 billion. So Bristol is not alone in having a deficit on our high needs block. So there are many local authorities nationally that are in the same position. So County Council's network nationally surveyed, I think, chief execs from across the country, and it's roughly 3.8 billion, 4 billion. So this is part of the national debate around how the census that might work in the future. And I suppose we'll play our role in that. But no, I mean, I think the key thing for me is that there has been really good support from across the system. Our local area partners in health have been really supportive, as have Parent Care Forum. Recognising the challenge, recognising this is something that we need to all take on together, and also when I've been talking to schools, like yours, that actually there's an understanding of the complexity of this challenge, and that there isn't a simple solution. This is about fundamentally hard work, a very strategic approach to solving the problem. I'm really delighted because our team is really passionate and really supportive of the work we're trying to do. They're rising to the challenge. But we all have to sustain the improvements we are working on, in the long term for this to work.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, comes with an apology because I am new to the Bristol Forum, so I don't know of some of the previous conversations that you've had. But very grateful that you've continued the non-statutory support while you're going through all the processes. But you also mentioned in your report that that's one of the reasons that has driven up the demand for EHCPs. And I just wanted to ask whether you've considered whether that's still the right thing to do. And I am conscious that some other local authorities have gone backwards from that position because of the sort of administrative burden that it's created when they can meet the need without an EHCP. So I just wondered whether you were reconsidering that at all.
Yeah, well, look, I think the decision was made by the Cabinet at the time in February 2024. So, that was the decision that was made and was then implemented. What we have tried to do, again, I suppose noting the report from Steve, where there is already a significant deficit on the high needs block, is launch the early intervention fund, and that we will review again and start to look at how that can shift next year. But the previous non-statutory top-up funding was approximately, I think, £8 million and supported about 1,000 children. So it's a very challenging position to be able to kind of reverse the decision. I hear what you're saying, but again, that would be challenging in the current financial context to put something in of that nature. But that's not to say that we shouldn't keep investing in early intervention and think about those opportunities. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to Merch, then we'll go to Kate, then we'll go to Nick, then we'll go to Eileen. So Merch.
Yeah, thank you. I also thought the report was excellent. And I'm very grateful as well that the non-statutory top-up will continue. I'm very keen to understand more about the early intervention fund, because it strikes me that this is, the more that can be done as early as possible, the better the outcomes for everybody. And my question really is about the direction of travel nationally, because it seems to me that, like the previous person mentioned, about going away from EHCPs but trying to satisfy needs is a very positive way to go. But obviously any changes to any system are going to take a long time. And do you feel from government that they will continue to support local authorities facing these horrible, horrible challenges?
I think we don't know what the reform agenda will be in terms of SEND. There's been various points made in the press, but that's not policy. So it's difficult to know. I think we submitted our consultation response as part of some of the feedback that they were asking for at certain points, but very difficult to know. I think we know that talking to schools are doing their absolute best for children, as are our services as well. The financial position nationally is the challenge. As I said, it's a £3.8 billion deficit essentially nationally. So certainly there's a significant economic challenge around that. But I think the most important thing for our service, and I know my colleagues in the service, is that we don't lose children. In this process, actually, we keep children at the heart of the work that we're doing. They are some of the most vulnerable children in our communities, and they do need our support. And whilst an EHCP as a document captures a number of needs, actually it's the good work of our system that supports those children. So that's what we don't want to lose. I know the national direction is to promote more inclusion, and that might be where Ofsted moved to with this report card proposal. Potentially the school's white paper will move in that direction as well. I'm almost certain they'll talk much more about early intervention. I suppose what I would say is that the strategy that we're running is consistent, we think, at this point with the direction of travel. So yeah, it's difficult to gauge too much of the debate as to what will land in the white paper when it arrives or what won't. So I won't speculate too much more beyond that, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Vic, I guess the unanswerable question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you see any material risk that what might come out in the as yet unknown white paper could derail these plans and programs that you've been putting in place?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I don't know. I suppose we don't know till we government had talked about the autumn. I mean, the one announcement we had in the comprehensive spending review was the extension of the statutory override. Had that not happened, those deficits, that 3.8 billion that's estimated nationally, would fall to all councils. And obviously we as Bristol would have to take our share of that, and that would be a significant risk to the council's own budget had that not been extended. So it's been extended, I think, for 2 years. Is that right, Steve? Yeah, Steve's nodding. So that's the key certainty we have at the moment, is that there is 2 years more of protection for local authorities. I think our strategy talks about a lot of the things we're hearing nationally. Early intervention, we will still require more specialist provision for children. We will need to build provision, whether that's from national funding or local funding, and we will still, regardless of what may happen to a statutory document, we will still, I'm sure, have obligations to support vulnerable children in communities, and that's a really important role for us as a local authority. So from a purpose perspective, I suspect there'll be lots that might change procedurally, but actually won't change in terms of our role as a local authority, as kind of offering place-based leadership to the children in our city.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's clear. Thank you. Kate P, we'll go to you.
Hi, thank you, and thanks for that report. Yes, I found it really useful. and really detailed. And on that note, I'm just thinking, we've talked a lot about early intervention, and obviously as maintained nursery schools, we've got a major part to play in this, because we have children who start with us from 2. So we've got that really early identification and how we support our children. And we've got a high percentage of children with SEND in our nursery schools, because we have teachers, we have really experienced practitioners, and so we're able to meet their needs. We also have children that are deferred from reception who may not have alternative specialist provision to go to, or schools who find it, it's a real challenge to have children in primary, particularly in reception. And so what we have done is work really closely with our primary schools, because what we've noticed is that children, quite often, they just need that pause. So sometimes children who stay with us for an additional year, they then are able to make that progress, and they can access education in a primary school. So I suppose my question is, are you aware of the proposal from the maintained nursery schools around the SEND and inclusion project that we have put to, and I don't know how far it's got. So that's my question, is about, are you aware of the proposal for the inclusion model for nursery schools?
In short, yes. I met with Lucy Driver, who has been taking us through that. It was a sizable report. I think you'll have seen it. So there's a lot in there which we're looking at. So I won't respond here, but we will definitely pick it up with maintained nurseries. Agreed.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks very much.
And thank you for colleagues who worked on that. I appreciate there was a lot of effort put in, and Lucy and I had a good conversation about that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of condition 7, building provision to meet current and future demands, and I think we've got a place within that, haven't we? Thank you.
Thank you for Kate, and reminding us of the early years dimension. We'll go to Nick, who looks like he's on holiday somewhere.
I wish I had taken that picture. Hi, I'm interested by the statistic at the top of page 10 in particular about the proportion of new requests from children already in receipt of non-statutory top-up and how that's varied. I'm curious whether there's any information tracking essentially the cost difference, either on an individual basis or for that group. Essentially, the question is, is the move from non-statutory top-up to EHCP leading to an increase or a reduction in the funding that children receive, and therefore conversely an increase or a reduction in the deficit in the high needs block?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a mix. For some, it has been a lower level of funding. For some, it's been higher. I think we did a bit of analysis of that cohort. So Guy Marshall's here, who's been supporting us with some of that analysis. I think the delta between the two was broadly that there was no significant saving from one to the other when looking at that sample. I think given that the average level of funding that some children were getting in respect of non-statutory top-up was about £8,000. There would have been a range of support, but about 8,000 was the average that we were able to calculate. That almost takes you into the banding that children would receive with an education, health and care plan. So one of the, just before I hand to Guy, one of the interesting anomalies, I suppose, of Bristol SEND system is that we typically had a lower, by about 1 percentage point, lower cohort of children with education, health and care plans, whilst having a higher cohort of children on SEN support, so SEND K coded, compared to the national average. And that's predominantly because non-statutory top-up was supporting with funding in that space. What we're now seeing is a bit of a rebalancing toward the national position, which is approximately 5% of children with education, health and care plans. So the numbers were kind of slightly inverse and are getting close to the national, but Guy might want to comment on the financial effect of the two.
I think the answer probably is that it's relatively limited in terms of the overall financial impact. As you said, Vic, the transfer across from non-statutory to statutory probably resulted in less than 10% movement for most children in their top-up payments. So I think relatively low impact. I think it was probably less impactful than we thought it was going to be when that decision was made.
Okay, so I guess the supplementary question there is, thank you. I guess the supplementary question is if there's limited change in terms of finance, the move from top up to EHCP must entirely be in terms of what's the benefit? I guess the benefit is accountability and accuracy in how this money is being spent. Is that right?
I could probably comment on that. I think the two points are, one is under the current framework, the Education, Health and Care Plan has a is a statutory plan. It's a legal plan, and therefore, where children are supported in a non-statutory way, they don't have the same legal rights, and therefore that can be to the benefit of partners supporting children. I think the key thing is that the funding was and is as it continues to be in place for some of those children, supporting that need that presents, and I think what we've tried to do, I suppose, in extending the non-statutory top up is that while those children are waiting assessment, we carry on that funding, and then once the assessment is complete, if they are then identified at a higher level of funding, for example, so higher than that 8,000 average, that's backdated to the point at which the 20 weeks would have expired in terms of that statutory timescale to finish the EHCP. So therefore, if it was 25 weeks, that additional 5 weeks of funding is paid to schools to make sure we accommodate the when it should have been completed by. So in trying to keep the system fair and equitable and ensure that no one is penalised in that way. I think the challenge with non-statutory top-up was that there wasn't the same tracking, I suppose. So it is worth noting that with an EHCP, there's a level of tracking and statutory requirement around that. So being able to track the outcomes and assess in the way that you do, where professional partners get involved to better understand a child's needs, that wouldn't have been there. But I think fundamentally that has caused the significant rise in needs assessments as we've seen in the data in the report.
Can I just make a comment on that? It seems to me that if the funding change is not significant, the actual cost of the process of getting the EHCPs has been very significant, both from the council and from people engaging in the system, schools trying to produce all of this stuff. And that seems to me, I can understand that there's the tracking and all of that is very important and relevant to sort of measuring outcomes. But it seems that there's a huge resource has gone into dealing with these additional EHCPs, which is unfortunate, and you would have hoped that could have gone directly to supporting the children.
Yeah, I probably can't speak to the conditions on which the decision were made at the time. The decision was made and then implemented. What we are doing is responding to the challenge as we see it now.
Sorry. Right, we'll go to Eileen. Eileen, it is your last forum. You are retiring, so don't hold back.
No, I'm gonna be very and recognise the hard work that's gone into the report and to the restructuring and the change and the impetus that's come in to moving this forward. I think it's a really challenging area and not an easy one to fix. And there's been a lot of really good work. I think I've 3 questions. So the first question is, are there plans in a particular, are the plans showing a particular area of need is there an analysis of this area of need so that early intervention can be targeted to meet that need early on? So are you recognising a particular area within the city that we can support? There was an analysis quite a few years ago of the needs in plans, and Bristol was not the same. It wasn't working in the same, wasn't recognising moderate learning difficulties in the same way as other parts of the country. So is there a piece of work around what are the needs that are coming through, and how can we support children earlier to meet those needs so that they don't get more significant problems later on? I think the second question, if I can stop there if you want, or
I'm happy to take them all.
Okay. Second question is around appeal. I appreciate they're fewer than the national average, which is positive, but 25 more than last year, which is that a concern? And how much of a cost factor is that? Is that something that the local authority is noticing an increased cost? And how many of those appeals are being upheld? And so the local authority's initial decision making has been challenged. I think that would be interesting for Forum to know. And then my final question is around the significantly higher than average suspensions for pupils with SEN. I find that very, very concerning, and it's an area of historic challenge, but I think to see an increase is really worrying. And what is the local authority doing to support, but also to challenge schools around this? How do we know that pupils are being treated fairly and that their SEND is being recognised, and that reasonable adjustments are being made before decisions are being made to suspend? That's me. I'm done. Okay.
That's fine. It's your final one, so you can have. I think that was 4 questions, Eileen. You slipped one extra in there, but that's okay. So highest number of requests. So the highest. We did this by ward. There's a map which I can share outside of the meeting. I don't think it's in the report actually. Highest number of requests are from Avonmouth and Lawrence and Weston, Philwood, and then Hartcliffe and Withywood. So that's where we've seen the highest number of requests in terms of volume. So those are the areas. I suppose there's kind of moderate to high in Hengrove, Whitchurch Park, Lawrence Hill, and Ashley. So we will be. You don't need to necessarily write this all down, because we will be publishing a improvement plan on needs assessment timeliness, which we're working on with our partners, and that will have some of this data in there. But as you've asked specifically, in terms of the age range, we're recording. I mean, obviously at key stage transfer point, so early years just before joining reception, year 5, year 6. That's not unusual. You'll know a schools where you see that need. I think what our system appears to be doing quite well is identifying children in that kind of nursery to reception, into year 1. So whilst you might say, high requests for assessment at that stage is a concern, actually, it's what we would expect is that in a good early intervention, early identification system, seeing higher requests at, in those first 3 years before children kind of get into key stage 2 isn't unusual. Obviously, schools need to make sure that they're applying the graduated approach and support that they should already, but that there is that we see fairly low requests as children approach post 16. So it's not a perfect kind of curve down, but it tends to be predominantly in that key stage 1 early years space where we see high requests, and some of that carries on into into key stage 2. We are a city, so obviously there's a transience to the population in that there are sometimes families moving in and out of the city or moving around the city, so that can also have a bit of an effect on when schools might submit needs assessment, because they may not know those children for a very long time before they then go through that process. So whereas in authorities there's less where there might be less transience, you might see a more kind of typical curve. There's a bit more of that, I suppose, in our city, and our colleagues in schools will know that from the mobility of the population. Highest need, on no surprise, I suppose, would be that rise nationally that we're seeing in terms of speech and language need, social, emotional, mental health need, children with diagnoses of autism as well. So those are following the traditional national picture. I think in terms of, so you asked a couple of questions, I think in terms of early intervention, early support, and that link to suspensions. I'll probably invite Emma Lloyd to speak about the Inclusive Learning Service and what they'll be doing in the autumn, and possibly to touch on appeals, but I think we may not have the data for you kind of in this discussion, so that might be one we take away. Emma, can I invite you?
Aileen, first of all, congratulations. I'm sorry, I'm keeping my camera off. My Wi-Fi is a little bit patchy, shall we say, tonight, so let me know if I suddenly disappear. So Vic has said about the Inclusive Learning Service, which is launching in September. Really quickly, Vic mentioned about the fact that we've got some really good professionals. We've got EPs, not from Bristol, from other local authorities. We've got people that have been doing similar roles in other local authorities as well. So we've got a huge amount of people with a lot of expertise that will be joining the team for September. But the plan for the team is that they will be working across all our mainstream primary and secondary schools, and that will be a piece of work around building up those relationships. But the key thing here is about making sure that we've got that inclusive practice really being supported and embedded across all schools. We've already mentioned this afternoon, this evening, about the direction that we think the government is travelling in terms of more inclusive mainstream schools. And this team really will be about making sure that we help schools to get to that point. So they will be looking at how to best deploy things like the Early Intervention Fund to make the most impact for children and young people in schools. It will be about how to support the interventions and approaches and pedagogy in schools to make sure that we are meeting those needs and identifying those needs at the earliest point. So the sort of plan will be that if there are schools where there is a high level of indicators that might suggest there might be some unmet need, it will be that team that is able to identify that and then help the school to get the support, training, whatever it is that they need in order to support the children and young people in their schools. That links in with the need type. The CEN2 data was published a couple of weeks ago. Bristol is broadly in line with the national trends in terms of the types of needs. Speech, language, SEMH over time has been obviously growing. But that moderate sort of learning difficulties is always a really interesting one. I think we've had this conversation years ago, Aileen, about the fact that we have children that maybe are identified with a particular need, but there's an underlying sort of primary need that's not necessarily been identified. Again, the Inclusive Learning Service will be helping to support schools in really unpicking and identifying what those needs are. So the output of that will be hopefully needs being met at an earlier stage, staff in schools feeling that they have more capacity and are slightly more empowered around meeting those needs. But then we also would like to think that indicators like suspensions and permanent exclusions will decrease as well. And of course we have the AP team that still work really closely in that space around supporting schools and children as well. And I don't know if I've missed. Oh, and then the appeal. No, the appeals thing. Again, I'll get back to you on that only because the CEN2 data, we're just triangulating our data, the CEN2 data, and making sure that we've got a really clear picture of that.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Emma.
Eileen's speaking, I think, but she's on mute.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say thank you very much for those. That I'm really, really pleased that there is like a proper plan to meet the needs earlier on. I think one of the things that is very challenging for a local authority is the fact that place funding hasn't followed inflation. So instead of the money that's come from the local authority following inflation for secondary schools, we're still getting 10,000, which is per place, just about £4,000 short of where it should be inflationary wise. So the local authority's picking up a bill for something that is really a failure of central government funding. But I also want to ask is there a real move to work closely with academies in this? The early intervention is being funded by the local authority, but how much integration is there happening with academies, and how much are they being held to account and asked to meet the costs of some of those strategies themselves within this, because it's a whole city plan, but if it's just the local authority picking up the tab for the improvements, I think that would be rather unfortunate.
No, I think that's a really, really good question. Yes, this is to all schools. We're going to be working with academies, maintained schools, as I said, primary and secondary initially, but maybe in the future that might expand wider. But yeah, academies are part of that. As part of our new governance, the Send an AP Delivery Board has in strengthening inclusive practice delivery group, which is actually co-chaired by two MAT leads from different MATs for Send, and they have been really closely working with all of the teams and all the delivery in making sure that we have got a really clear joined up approach. And you're absolutely right, this is about strengthening inclusive practice, and our job is to help facilitate it as a local authority and help support that work. But we also need multi-academy trusts and standalone schools as well to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with us. It isn't just one, it's not just the local authority carrying all of this, but I think all of the MATs that I've spoken to and we've been working with are up for that challenge, although we're obviously navigating kind of uncomfortable conversations sometimes about kind of responsibility and supporting, but ultimately everybody in the system's here to make sure that children are getting their needs met at the right time.
Thank you. I guess just to finish up, I've got two sort of questions. One, Vic, on the capital programme, do you see any opportunity to accelerate or reverse the sort of delays in that?
I think the key thing there is we're doing everything we can, but it does take time to undertake feasibilities on schemes, get to know whether they're whether the schemes that we're pursuing are financially feasible. We've got to consider transport links for children, particularly where they might use home to school transport. We know that there are sometimes challenges in the condition of the education estate. That's not unique to Bristol. Nationally, there are challenges in the national education estate, and that can cause all sorts of complications and challenges in these kinds of schemes. So, and I think whilst there are some schemes underway, what we're trying to do is accelerate more. So we've got a large number of schemes that we are undertaking feasibilities on. Some of that is existing schools, some of that is potential acquisition of sites. So it's a real mix of programs, I would say. The DFE program and the free school would bring, I suppose, 164 places to Bristol. Target was September 2028, I think, for the opening of that. That has been delayed by over 6 months now, so we may lose that opening date. So, we're incurring, I suppose, a lot of the challenges of, what is a complex capital program. But, the team are working really hard on it, I suppose. And, we're trying to clear the way for them to make sure they can continue to do good work in that space. But yeah, no, it's a good question.
Okay, thank you. I guess the final ask would be, clearly a lot of interest and recognition this is a really valuable report. Could it come back to the forum, I don't know, in 6 months again, and use it, basically using the, you know, the same report that you're submitting elsewhere?
Yeah, so we will be, I think we are taking this to committee on a regular cycle. I will check whether that's biannual or quarterly, but any time that comes to committee, we're more than happy to kind of mirror that as an update here. That's fine.
Okay.
And the format will likely just refresh. So it's taken, you know, well, thanks to Sam Flowers, because it was a significant piece of work to pull together all of the various strands of work that are happening into one relatively straightforward to understand report, given the complexity of the program. So yeah, thank you for the feedback on the report as well.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we're going to move on. The item 7 is self-assessment survey. We've actually had 17 responses. That's great. If you haven't responded, please do, because some of those came in relatively late. So what we're going to do is, when I say we, it's not me, but the team are going to consolidate that. And we're going to present that back to the September meeting, and we can discuss it then. And the final point is all of the dates have been issued for next year, so you should have all got those. So please put them in your diaries, and they should be aligned so we get as up-to-date financial reports as we can.
Just to confirm, Chair, I'll make sure I'm sending those email dates out within the week, so people will get invites to the meetings to let them know so they can pop it in their calendars.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's going to complete the business for today. Anybody, any more for any more? In which case, thank you all. Those of you who have summers off, have a nice summer. Those of you who don't have summers off, will have a nice summer as well. Okay, and thank you very much. Okay, cheers now. Bye.